Comeau, Managing Director of PhocusWright, and I'm thrilled to introduce this next version of New Reality with Andrea Kates, which is brought to you by Salesforce. Harness the power of Salesforce Customer 360 to deliver personalized experiences and build long-term traveler loyalty. Andrea and I will certainly dig into topics of personalization and customer loyalty as we proceed through this version of this show. But I'm thrilled to have Andrea here today. Andrea and I go back a few years, and she currently is a co-founder of Futureproofing Next, and she's worked on over, I think, 200 corporate growth initiatives, supporting the process of moving beyond innovation towards future-proofing. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. She's worked with lots of large Fortune 100 companies, Ford, Fujitsu, Allstate, Cisco, and she was also the CEO of a software as a service tech company, which pioneered the application of lean startup methods for large corporations. She's a frequent keynote speaker, and she's led many global tech forums. So one of the core goals of New Reality With is to try to map out the future and predict what the industry will look like and what technologies will drive permanent change, and also what sort of permanent change on the traveler landscape will stick. So future-proofing is seeing ahead of emerging trends, learning new technologies, and accelerating the pace of great experiments, and getting strong commitment to innovation from the organization. So I love that, first of all. And Andrea, I want you to first off, welcome, and thanks for joining us. I want you to kind of put that into your own words and explain why companies need to future-proof their business and not just focus on, okay, what's our innovation roadmap?
Well, it's great to be here too, Pete. And this is a really exciting program because it's the perfect moment where everyone has been disrupted. No one can say, oh, change is not happening to my industry. And I think the travel industry is at the nexus of all of the consumer anxiety, all of the sense of what's different in our lives, because getting out and going other places is fundamentally changed forever, I believe. And number three is that the economic moment that's about to happen, you know, we hear about some furloughs and lots of changes in the industry itself, makes us really have to rethink what it means to look ahead, you know, and I'm a rational optimist. I like to look at facts, understand that there's huge dramatic impact, but also focus on what can we do about this? What should business leaders listening in and watching today really, what can we do with all of this? And to me, predicting it is not as important as responding with a lot of precision and insight.
That's great. So it's always interesting to have somebody that knows a lot about the travel industry, but you know, doesn't necessarily kind of operate within the industry. And as you see, you know, hotel occupancy rates in the teens and airlines suffering from, you know, they're 90% down year over year, and they're trying to kind of rethink their businesses as well as to kind of survive in the near term. I'd just like to kind of throw out, before we really dig into the crux of the conversation, like, what are you seeing from the outsider's perspective, kind of an outsider insider? You travel quite a few miles each year, and you've been sequestered in the Bay Area, obviously, since the pandemic started. So maybe just some perspectives from your end as kind of an outsider but insider.
Exactly. Well, last year I spent, I think, 32 weeks out of the year on elsewhere, not in the Bay Area, probably longer than that if we think of the longer trips, and going all over the place. And my life last year personally was 100% travel focused. Every day was the itinerary and figuring out where I'd be. So that for me personally was the very first dramatic moment, which is all flights canceled, all live events turning virtual. And then I started thinking, it's not just about Andrea, it's really about what we see in terms of business leaders and what this means for consumers in general, and what this means for companies. You know, what do we do about this? I see three things. Number one, what do we do now to acknowledge what is today and for the next 12 months? Super important. So I'll talk about companies that I think are tone deaf, saying the right thing, but actually in having the wrong tone. It sounds like it's all about them as opposed to really having empathy for the customer. So that's one. Number two is something that we call the pyramid of possibility, which is, we can all figure out as leaders, okay, how do we get social distancing to happen? I think there's a little higher, which is how do we actually address the technical debt that we had all along? There were a lot of things we kept putting off, especially in the travel industry. We knew that we could have had touchless entry. There were some people who did it, but we weren't really fully committed. So I think that's the second, is to not just social distance and do what's required, but to start going up that pyramid. And then the third, and we'll talk about this because this is the fun way the truth is that the travel industry will not recover by doing more of what it used to do better and faster. Not going to happen. And so we have what we call an aperture lens across industry of, what if they took a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this other and turned it into something really unique? And I think that we'll talk later about how Travis Scott and Fortnite have redefined the concert. Is there a virtual experience in travel that's not just cool and groovy, but actually has legs? And I think that we should talk about all three of those areas.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm wondering if as you think about the travel industry pre-pandemic, there was obviously some areas and room for improvements, right? And I think as we kind of proceed through the pandemic, it allows companies to kind of sit back a little bit and reflect on some of those opportunities that maybe they haven't quite gotten to. But obviously they have to kind of change and really address the moment. And airlines, I think, a good example to your point that, tone deaf, it's a challenge. And you see the airlines kind of dividing around middle seat policies, and some are, it's tough to operate. We know that they can't operate profitably as they're, if they're not selling middle seats, they're not going to operate profitably. But in order to get people to travel again, people need to feel comfortable. And it may or may not be actually, increase their risk if there is somebody in that middle seat, just due to the filtration systems on the airlines. But the perception is there. So that's really what we're seeing companies, and you and I talked about this as we were prepping for this session, about some of the partnerships that they've put into place to really double down on cleanliness and really kind of throw out household names to make sure that people are starting to feel comfortable.
Right. Well, I'll separate. I think it's really great. So let's start with airlines, because I think we should talk about airlines. We should talk about hotels and the hospitality guest experience, what that looks like, and probably even like rental cars. And they're, in each of those. And there are probably some points in between, right? The virtual experiences. But let's talk about companies that I think are doing great right now. I mean, I know United is just announced that they had to furlough 36,000 people or so, or that's anticipated. And as you said, economic news really hard. At the same time, we've looked at Clorox and United Airlines and Cleveland Clinic and the way that they came together. Don't know about the profitability of this, but in terms of the resonance with someone who's a consumer, it looks like they're doing the right thing in terms of, okay, we are going to do the work that's required to put health and safety first. We're going to figure this out. There's some science behind it. And so to me, that's a really great example of an airline looking like, I don't know the details of it, but looking like at the same time that they have to furlough people, we know they're suffering, but they're also proactively doing what I think is proactive, positive leadership. And I think that's at least where the bar should be for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting, and again, I think it goes beyond just kind of operational issues, and they really need to be smart and sensitive to getting travelers to feel comfortable, because that's going to be the biggest challenge as we move into a start, the beginning part of the recovery process, which is probably where we're at. There's some fits and spurts, certainly, and some increasing cases in certain parts of the US. but across the globe, you see some of that moving a little bit further and creating bubbles where, cross-country travel is possible. But it's really about making sure that the travelers feel safe. And that doesn't go just for the airlines. Obviously, it goes for hotels. And, we're starting to see short-term rentals as a category. Expedia just, I think, announced last week that was a category that was really starting to resonate with their travelers and kind of coming back first. You see some tech startups like Sonder raising some money, kind of pivoting their model slightly. But that's an area travelers, like consistent experience. And I think that's a challenge in the short-term rental space. But Sonder has provided that experience. And they've also, they've got, I think, 12,000 rooms now that they manage. And they keep that level of consistency to it. So, hotels are follow right along with airlines.
Well, one of the things I think is interesting, because years ago we worked with a Hyatt and they had done something called the Respire Room, where they looked at the science. People just at those days, pre-COVID, were looking for a cleaner, healthier, better smelling room. And they actually did what I thought was a really great idea with the Respire Room to get ahead of this and say, what's the science? HEPA filtration. Let's look at hospitals, learn from there, get the science, get it right, create a guest experience that's very for people with allergies, et cetera. Well, let's take that mindset to today. The reason that I think that being real about this is important is everybody thinks middle seat. I mean, everybody thinks middle seat. When you look at the science, and when I talk to people who are in the world of understanding clean air and what really spreads the virus, you can spray your pen a lot of times, but wearing a face mask does a whole lot, right? And so getting the science right as far as the air filtration, is the middle seat the only option? I think that's probably a limited mindset. Of course, I love the fact that JetBlue is like, we're not going to sell middle seats. It's like, yes, that's the first brand I'm going to book with, but it's not about Andrea, right? It's about what does the consumer think? I think that getting that science right and helping us understand and helping the employees understand the science behind what is it that really makes this flight safe. And so it doesn't sound like PR. I look back to something like Tylenol, where they had a problem. They put a whole bunch of millions of dollars into proactively making you feel like there's no way that this is going to happen again. So with flights, I mean, I just really think that airlines should sit down. If I were in charge of an airline group today, I would sit down and get all of the science right. What is it about our air? What are the parts per million that everybody can really breathe safely? How is the virus transmitted? I know I do a bunch of work in China and in Japan, and face masks are just common. It's a social habit. Mm-hmm. So what are the kinds of things we can do in addition to middle seats? But are we thinking in too limited a way about how to actually accommodate the deep anxiety on the part of the customer? And I think we're a little too old school in our thinking right now.
So as you're working with your current clients, how much time are you spending on addressing the near term? So let's say the next 6 to 12 months versus how much are you pushing them to kind of rethink what, 12 plus months. And, there's a question mark of when will this vaccine come into place? And also when will we kind of return to some sort of normalcy? So I'm interested to get your perspective on that.
Well, with your permission, I'd love to share the pyramid of possibility, because it helps really demonstrate the way that we've been having these conversations, because everybody thinks it's either or. And to be perfectly honest, people have always been afraid. I mean, safety on airlines is always something that has been, people are afraid of flying. I know that that's one of the biggest fears, and people do it all the time. So what we are doing now with clients is saying, okay, of course you have to do the back to work initiatives. I'm at the bottom of the pyramid. Of course, tactically, you have to figure out for your workforce to just get people back to work. And I'll give some examples in a second. Of course, you have to do the basics, but don't miss the opportunity of this pandemic. Don't miss the chance as we're doing that. And a colleague named Gary Pisano at Harvard talks about you have to renovate your kitchen while you're living in your house. So yes, we need to get the house in order. And at the same time, I believe that we have this chance to be really brilliant in our leadership and pick at least level 2. I would actually recommend levels 3 and 4 to go and initiate right now, so that when we all come out of this, we are a different company. Fundamentally, we are addressing different changes. So for instance, I was brainstorming this a little bit with you, Pete, and we came up with some thoughts like back to work at the bottom, right? Redesigning work a little higher up, reimagining the future even higher, and leading the future where we decide, and I don't care if we're the David or the Goliath in this equation, we don't have to be the biggest players to be the proactive ones, to commit to a bigger concept of what should we look like in the future. So I'll go through the super simple examples in the beginning. Back to work. Okay, social distancing. In China, there are already a lot of hotels, because they're a little ahead of us in terms of the timing, that are, you never see a human being. And we would say, oh my gosh, that's a terrible guest experience. Well, not if you have a person texting you all the time saying, hey, Pete, how's it going? Hey, Pete, this is Andrea. Just wanted to make sure you need towels. I mean, there's so many ways to have a non-human, soft, cool guest experience without, an intimacy that's created in different ways than we're used to. It doesn't have to be shaking hands, hugging, and giving an extra set of towels. So this is what I think is, clearly, I'm not going to eat at a hotel for a long time unless people like Soho Farmhouse, and I think the Fairmount as well, they have special rooms. They're not really full right now. So there are ways that you can have a really wonderful dining experience with social distancing in a different way. Now, it sounds very elitist, but you can actually imagine you could do this with a lot of Airstreams as well. It could be for middle-class people. It doesn't just have to be these elites. So what are some low-cost, high-cost ways of addressing the back to work? That's for sure. And I think part of this too has to be educating our workforce so that they know the facts, so that they understand how to get these guests to feel comfortable. So I would say, yes, everybody, of course, that's table stakes, needs to go back to work with some ways of ensuring that people feel that their health and safety are taken care of. That's the lowest part of the pyramid. Any thoughts on that, Pete?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think as you start to move up the pyramid, I think Minhouse is an interesting example. It's a I'd say a startup. They were founded maybe 3 years back, and some fairly basic technology that exists out there, such as geofencing. When a customer gets within a certain geofence, they're already getting delivered a personalized message. They're getting their digital room key. Some of these things that, the technology's been around for quite some time, but they're providing kind of this frictionless and touchless service that I think has some legs. Certainly, their focus on business travel is challenging at the moment. But I think they're onto something as far as providing a guest experience that goes, into a new area of hospitality that I think is really thoughtful as far as that experience with travelers.
I agree, and I think that it's really interesting to think of consumer as well as business, because if you think of business, there are a lot of leaders in technology and just being able to rent space in a hotel on an as-needed basis. And there's so many people in this future of work that need a remote moment by moment. You might want to be able to work, but not go into your company headquarters. So I know you and I have talked about this in the past too, the technology to be able to, I know there was a company called Liquid Space that allowed company headquarters to kind of rent themselves out on an hourly basis. There's the hourly hotel options. And it strikes me that that's also a no-brainer, that once again, if I were in charge of a travel company, I would get people together and say, okay, let's be really creative here and figure out what people are needing right now. And I think people need the hotel experience in a very different way. But I believe that there's a blend between business travel and working, period. Right? We don't have offices the same way that we used to. It strikes me that hotels could be really useful in that arena, in that hybrid arena. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, a company like Dayuse, who we know quite well at PhocusWire, they were one of the earlier pioneers of renting a hotel room during the day by the hour. And we're certainly seeing applications of that once office spaces have closed down and people just don't feel comfortable going back to the office, but they also need to get out of their home office. So that's a perfect application and a, you know, a great example of reimagining a future. And again, we can think about what things are being forced by the pandemic and what things will stick beyond the pandemic. And I think that is one of those things that will absolutely stick because, you know, remote work is certainly increasing and will be here. And having a place where you can go for a couple of hours and take a few phone calls is definitely going to be here. The airlines, I see airline subscriptions up here. That's an interesting one. Subscriptions, you know, subscriptions in general, we're starting to see, you know, outside of travel, you know, Walmart is releasing their new subscription service to kind of, you know, compete in some ways against Amazon Prime. Twitter is hiring, you know, somebody to look after subscriptions. It's a little bit ambiguous, but, you know, certainly increased their stock price yesterday by, I think, 8 to 9%. So the subscription model is a really interesting one. Airlines have tried it. Nobody's been overly successful with it. Curious to get your take on that sort of model, which obviously has some benefits from a customer loyalty perspective.
One of the things I'm really excited about is this book I did not write. I wish I did. It's called The Forever Transaction by Robbie Kellman Baxter. And it struck me, here's a statistic, 89% of companies with a subscription or a forever transaction loyalty, not a loyalty program, not just a subscription, but a really forever transaction company, 89% of them did not lose business during COVID. So people, you know, personally, I'm part of a gym. They started doing online classes. I thought, no way. I pay the same amount that I used to go to the gym. And you know what? I like it better now. So I think that there's a limitation. Once again, when we do the cross-industry talk in a minute here, Pete, I think that the problem with travel right now is that they're thinking like travel people. The problem with travel subscriptions is that they're thinking like, how can I get Andrea to buy X number of tickets for my plane? But that's not why Andrea travels. And so people who are selling subscriptions need to imagine what is Andrea's end-to-end need and in what ways can a subscription serve that? And there's a lot of really good models for this. So for instance, and we'll go into this a little bit, but for instance, if I need a seamless way of interacting with my overseas clients, right? Because I can't fly. There's so many ways that someone could come in and give me a subscription called Always Connected to Clients, right? And even ways for me before a meeting, they could have someone like FedEx Office deliver some really cool physical goods or workshop materials or surveys or reports so that there's a physical form factor. You know, who's taking care of that need? Are there ways that they could have people remotely be curated in experiences, right? So there could be someone like a masterclass person giving all of us an experience where there's this great speaker, and then we all go into breakout rooms. It's not travel exactly, but I think that people who think of subscriptions think, how can I sell an airline ticket or a suite of hotels on a subscription basis? That's not going to work.
Yeah.
However, I did notice in your PhocusWire that 80%, according to a pros survey, 80% of travelers say they would consider buying an airline membership if it came with additional elite privileges. So once again, if I'm the executive of a company trying to create a subscription business, I would talk to people like us, think broader about this, and then dig into that. What are these elite privileges? They don't have to be expensive ones. They can just be things that are the value proposition of what business travel means on a subscription basis. So for instance, the gym, I mean, I could get free classes anywhere on the internet, literally anywhere. Nike has free classes anywhere. Why is it my gym? They have this thing called after hours. So after you exercise, it's like, hi, Pete, how's it going? Are the kids doing okay with their homes? Great, Andrea. So I pay for that. Now, that's not a gym membership exactly, but that's what I care about. And I think that that's where the subscriptions have a lot of legs.
Yeah, and there's a lot of startup activity around some of those ancillary services that aren't immediately thought of by the airlines. For example, luggage storage is probably one of them, like a company like Stasher that has created relationships all over. And if that was part of an airline subscription service, something like that, and there's a lot of these types of things where if you're traveling through an airport and you have a long layover, you can access certain fitness facilities at hotels close by, things like that. And I think that's really what you're getting at, is it's not just about, okay, I have access to a certain number of plane tickets each month. It's much more about those things that you perceive value. And, obviously Amazon is kind of the one where you look at free shipping and fast shipping, and that's all that was needed when they released that, and they've kind of grown it and added a lot of additional services on top of it. I'm going to take a quick pause for those that are viewing this on recording, and we'll be back in 20 seconds.
If you're looking for more great content, check out How I Got Here, a weekly podcast with people that have led successful startups and created cutting-edge innovations in travel and transportation. Produced by PhocusWire and Mozio, it has a catalog that includes Steve Kaufer of TripAdvisor, Kayak's Steve Hafner, Expedia's Ariane Gorin, and more. We get the stories behind these companies, the highs and lows, and a lot of gritty details. How I Got Here is available on PhocusWire.com and all the usual podcast platforms.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to just kind of some of these ideas that go beyond travel. You and I talked a little bit about this, so if you want to kind of cue that up, and we can talk through, this kind of gets into the part of the conversation about what does the future hold? What are some of these opportunities? And at the top of your pyramid here, the cruise lines have, they have an opportunity. Obviously the cruise kind of was the one that just at the beginning of the pandemic was a really challenging, nightmare from a communication standpoint. But I think the cruise lines are being very thoughtful, and maybe it's an opportunity for them, back to, kind of Churchill, never let a good crisis go to waste. The cruise lines can really put a lot of thought into how do we redesign a safe experience, a healthy experience. And I think they're doing a lot of interesting things around that.
So this was one of the most exciting pieces of news I read, was because we keep theoretically talking, this was blank until yesterday, we keep talking about who's going to come forward and lead, right? Like the Tylenol moment. Who's going to step forward and lead? What would it take? And as I said, I like United and Clorox and Cleveland Clinic. That's great. This is really a big idea, to think about Royal Caribbean and Norwegian and the FDA and Merck and others coming together for something called the Healthy Sail Panel. And I think that it's just such a big idea, because it's thought leadership. It's like the cruise ships have been the poster child of infection. I mean, I remember Legionnaire's disease and outbreaks, and the Band-Aid approach is not going to work, and ship by ship is not going to work. And as you said, that visual of the Princess ship just kind of sailing around the world with infection is so dramatic. So I think that this is a great moment for us to think about who else can any company pull together to rise above and have a leadership position around what really works, what's really at the heart of it, going to make the consumer feel really comfortable. And basically what we're trying to do is build a tribe, right? A tribe of really committed people who believe you, and they'll experiment along with you. They might say, look, from now on, we're going to try it this way. And people are, as you know, in the cruise industry, so loyal. They're eager to get back to doing it. And so what is it that the companies can do? I think this Healthy Sail Panel is a great one. And I was pleased I read about it. For
sure. And the cruise lines have, like you said, they have this loyal group of customers, and we're already starting to see booking trends in 2021 that are very healthy for cruise lines, because it is that loyal base. But the cruise lines are thinking beyond that. They know they need to diversify their customer base. And now's an opportunity for them to rethink that. And I think they are doing some really interesting things around that. Arnie Weissman, our editor-in-chief of Travel Weekly, put a piece out yesterday, which talked a little bit about this panel and the opportunity for cruise lines to kind of redefine some of what they do and who they are, and also tap into other customer bases. So I think it's really interesting as well.
I do too. And I think now it's time for us to get crazy with the circle. What do you think?
Yes,
Pete?
I think so too.
Yeah. So doing a little brainstorming around, what might this be? Now, let me frame this. I actually think, first of all, the research that I do and the projects that I do are usually around cross-industry innovation. So I remember when I was studying Sharp Healthcare and figuring out how they won the Baldrige, they studied Ritz-Carlton and they studied Disney. They didn't study other hospitals because the best experiences are not going to come from your own industry. So this is in that spirit that we'd like to talk about a couple of things that we believe future-proofing travel might look like. So the question would be, let's sit down in a room and brainstorm. What is it that people travel for? And business travel might be a bit different from family travel, might be a bit different from travel with your friends, ski trips, et cetera. But let's think about part of it, which is, beyond the daily grind. And so the question is, who does that? Who does beyond the daily grind well? Well, of course, there's some places that are creating dining experiences and hospitality experiences that are even cooler than they used to be. Yes, it's socially distanced, but it's on the water. There's this cool architecture. They're making lemonade out of lemons, in terms of, it really feels like you've escaped. And then on the further end of this, the software end, there's even apps like Calm. So once again, if we're thinking of a subscription or something that is cross-industry, what are the things where people, I remember that hotel ad that had AAHHH. That feeling when you lie down on that bed and you've finally gotten out of the hotel lobby and the airport and all of that. And it's just, So to me, there are lots of ways to experience I also think that there's learning and family time. A lot of times people are traveling because they are trying to have really memorable experiences with their families. And so we think that companies like Lego and Prodigy and even Canva is a software that a big platform, it's a hugely successful platform out of Australia that allows you to create sort of social media artwork really well. So are there some maker kinds of things that have to do with travel that you could use to inspire cross-industry innovation? The next categories are companies with tribes. And these subscriptions, like Peloton people are Peloton people, right? There's a whole tribal connection. And it's not just that you get on the bike every day. It's that it's a whole community that's so loyal. Twitch, I don't know if you know about Twitch, but when someone told me about it, I thought, you got to be kidding me. It's people who watch other people play esports. And it's like, how can that be fun? Well, bazillions of people do it. So are there ways that I could have what I call a vicarious vacation by watching Pete on some sort of travel excursion and, looking over the shoulder of people through software? And once again, this notion of subscription comes from loyal tribes. What is it that we can all have as a social tribe that is really loyal? And once again, now we know that Lululemon just acquired Mirror to compete with Peloton because this is a damn good idea. Mm-hmm. We have this, like Starbucks used to have the third place. Travel is like the third dimension of who we are. We have our day-to-day lives, we have our work, and there's boundaries there. But this is so cool. This travel thing takes us to a world beyond. And so once again, we talked about safety and hygiene and everything from the Healthy Sail panel to the Clorox United collaboration. There are all kinds of companies that you could model yourselves after to get at the safe air and safe antivirus. Yeah, so Pete, what are your thoughts?
I'm just thinking Peloton. I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Were they just in the right place at the right time, or did they really have kind of a unique spin? And I fully agree with you that there's this loyal following. I never thought that I love to cycle, but I love to cycle outside because it frees my mind. But I have plenty of friends that have Peloton bikes and they are so passionate about it. And, and I'm just wondering your perspective on, was this kind of an acceleration due to pandemic, or were they onto something anyway?
I've been watching them for years. They have been onto something anyway through this notion of once again, connecting people socially. Some people are into gamification, so I can compete with Pete, or the details. That's not what I like about it. What I like about it is that you feel a social connectivity to your teacher, to your class, to your own personal goals, and to a world of people where it is people with the same values. And I think that that's what I call a tribe, people who identify with the same set of values.
Yeah. So so you've done a lot of work, obviously, on emerging technologies, and you've looked at AI and machine learning, obviously, as something that is here to stay. But what are some of those other technologies that apply to the travel industry that you think will help kind of, pull us through the next, even beyond the pandemic, let's say the next three to 5 years?
I'm glad you asked. I live in Silicon Valley, so everything has to be a drone or virtual reality or machine learning. Everything, every conversation has to have those buzzwords in them. But honestly, when you look at Travis Scott and Fortnite, and you look at a concert that has 12 plus million people participating in an online, basically gaming world that, a few years ago there was Second Life and it seemed kind of clunky. But this is really interesting because it's places, just like travel, as I said, is this other dimension, this other place outside of your day-to-day. I really think that there's ways that the travel industry should start taking VR pretty seriously through Oculus, through gaming. I think that Airbnb has the analog version with some of the experiences that they have, so people aren't necessarily, the same way that Uber drivers weren't driving people like taxi cabs, but they went crazy in terms of revenues for delivering food. So it was a new way of accommodating a shift in the need. So to me, this is what we can do too, is we can't get out of our houses maybe as much, but there's so many ways we can escape. What would it look like to have Patagonia experiences where we're climbing Mount Everest with a group of people, or we're going on some great canoeing trip or some, stand-up paddleboard experience. And yet the connection of the tribe and the sense of what travel is really all about is captured without this stereotypical way of it has to be on a plane in a hotel. And I think that airlines, hotels, and car rental companies are in a great position to do this. And by the way, if they don't, then someone like Disney will, which I know is also a travel company. But, Hamilton coming out as an online first, I think is really a big deal. I think that the ability to acknowledge that the world might have changed. So what are some ways, once again, if we were the head of a hotel chain, we were the head of an airline, a car rental company, anything in between, a travel booking company, I think we have to be very serious about this aperture, this other industries, and say to ourselves, number one, why are business travelers traveling, right? And number two, what are the best in class other industries that are already accommodating that need? We might put FedEx Office on that, right? The ability to deliver reports. Some people still need something delivered, the ability to curate content, a seminar types of things. Are there live streaming opportunities where one of the travel companies could become the Disney Channel for business content?
Yeah,
I think it's about to happen.
It's interesting, and you think about Airbnb and how they came out of the 2008 Great Recession, and it was a full platform transformation. So who would have thought that you could rent out your blow up mattress to a guest? And a lot of investors in your neck of the woods said, you are absolutely crazy. There's no way people are going to do this. And some, smart or fortunate or lucky investors said, these guys, I want to see this thing through. And, crises does create a ripe opportunity for startups to come in. And also for, in your world, for for some of the large corporates to really rethink and remodel what the future looks like. So we've got about, I don't know, maybe a couple of minutes left. So I'm just curious, it's difficult to predict who the next Airbnb will be. But what's your perspective on how these larger corporations maybe can use a crisis as an opportunity to really create something new and unique that can, bring them through the next decade plus?
There are three things. Number one, they have to come forward right now with a really inventive and non-tone deaf plan for health, safety, and recession. I mean, there's a lot of economic downside coming. It's a very tough economic time. So to me, that's number one. Number two is to be insanely skilled at building a tribe, not superficially skilled at it, not doing it like a loyalty program where you buy airline seats, but to really think deeply about what is it that will bring our tribe together, like Peloton. It's not about bikes. It's about something deeper. And I think that's number two, is how do you build your tribe? And number three is to really be an inspiring leader, to dare to be bold and to dare to lead a movement. And to me, the Healthy Sail panel is a great example. Who can you get together today at a table to think more broadly about what it is that travel is going to be in the future? And I think that you should convene that group today. So I would say, number one, health, safety, and recession. Number two, build a tribe. And number three, lead a movement.
I think that's a good place to end it, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining us here. Really enjoyed the conversation. So once again, I want to say thanks to Andrea for spending some time with us. I also want to thank Salesforce for sponsoring this series. Salesforce is another great example of a company that is really innovative and has done some really good things to kind of drive forward the CRM space and, even expand beyond that. So Salesforce harness the power of Salesforce Customer 360 to deliver personalized experiences and build long-term traveler loyalty. Again, I think a lot of what we have discussed today kind of fits in line with that motto. So thank you very much, Andrea. Appreciate it.